Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. Sorry for that little technical glitch, but got the prayer in, and I'm happy with that. And thank you, Wyra, for doing that. Just a brief background. Wyra was the shaman I worked with briefly for a pilot study in Peru with ayahuasca, and he's an awesome guy, and just happy he was able to say that prayer. So moving right along, for the first session, we have Joseph Barsuglia, PhD. He's going to be talking on From Extractive to Blessing, Inverting Psychedelic Pharmaceutical Biotech Through Adoption of the Nagoya Protocol as Principal Ethic. Joseph is advisor for Journey Collab. He's also advisor for Lionheart Ventures and for Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions. In the interest of time, I won't read his bio. It's up there. Joseph, you can say whatever you want to say about yourself if you want before you start. But just briefly, Joseph, I think, gave the very first LAMPS talk when I started the group and knocked it out of the park. He gave a great talk on Iboga, which is actually on YouTube if you want to see it. And it just blew me away. So very happy to have you here, Joseph. And thank you, and excited to hear what you're going to say. So take it away, Joseph.
All right. Really happy to be with everyone this morning. Thank you for joining us on a Sunday fun day here. I'm going to try to share my slides here. That working now? Looks good. Okay. So the title of my talk is From Extractive to Blessing. And what I want to kind of advance for us is that pharmaceutical biotech has been historically very extractive. And what would it look like if we hold this paradigm of blessing and apply this broadly to the landscape of what's going on? And we're going to dive into Iboga as well as the Nagoya protocol and see how these principles could apply to this landscape. And I have these slides on my website, which you can download. I packed too much content into this talk, so I'm going to kind of riff over the slides, and I invite you to download them later because there's going to be a lot of things I'm not going to cover, but I want to make this presentation, this talk, as a resource and a guide for our community, as well as potentially for psychedelic biotech companies. So Brad shared about my background relevant to this talk. I worked at an Ibogaine clinic for several years as a researcher, as a psychologist. I've worked with MAPS. I've led international retreats with Iboga with my partner, Trisha. And I've personally been really touched by the medicine. Iboga has been personally one of my highest healing allies, and I've sat with the medicine dozens of times and been to Gabon and initiated in a few different lineages. And I'm going to be sharing a little bit about Bwiti, but I'm a novice in Bwiti. I'm not authorized to speak for Bwiti, and these views I'm going to present do not reflect the views of Bwiti, but are more my personal reflections and what I think in this space could be helpful. I'm working with a group called Journey Collab, who, to my knowledge, are the first pharmaceutical biotech company that are abiding or adhering to the Nagoya protocol. And this talk kind of came out of my experience in the past year of conducting due diligence for an investment fund that's focused on funding companies that are demonstrating reciprocity and inclusion. This is called Lionheart Ventures. And what I found this last year was really, quite honestly, pretty depressing and also angering to sort of survey hundreds of companies and find that none of these companies are demonstrating reciprocity, have any understanding of Nagoya protocol, and really don't have this baked into their business model whatsoever. So I'm going to be sharing what I think is relevant after looking at all these companies and having worked in the psychedelic space for a little while. So defining extractive as something that's withdrawing or taking natural resources without replenishing, without giving, without stewarding the source of where it's being taken from. So if we shift from that, which we know biotech companies have historically been, to a paradigm of blessing, when we think about what blessing means, it really means to be giving radically through giving prosperity, giving, even invoking divine care, protecting, preserving, speaking well of, or I would think of lifting up these indigenous groups that have stewarded these technologies and these plants for centuries or millennia. When we look at the current landscape, these are just some articles, titles on Ibogaine. There's tons of money flooding into investments. We have Mr. Shark Tank, who's now excited to get in on the action and put money into this hot space that's expanding. We have people promising crazy returns on investment with ibogaine, and there was a recent ibogaine article that came out in Time magazine showing the potential of this. In the current landscape of companies that are moving forward with ibogaine, you have about 6 to 7 companies that are either advancing ibogaine or sort of derivative molecules of ibogaine like 18-MC or noribogaine. And in this landscape, I don't want to bash any of these companies. They're doing amazing work. They're going to advance this that can help millions of people with addiction. But when you look at their business models and if they've demonstrated adherence or any kind of give back to Gabon or adherence to Nagoya, essentially 0 of them are doing so. They may have plans to do this in the background, but they haven't made this public, and so I may be making some assumptions here, but I haven't seen this yet, that any of these companies have any organized or structured way to give back or adhere to Nagoya or the Free Prior Informed Consent Act. These are 2 statements from 2 companies acknowledging essentially that they understand and see that ibogaine has centuries of use, and its use is not something that's new. This, I would say, is perhaps the most important slide I could share with you today. This is a quote from Grandmother Bernadette, who is a recently deceased Bwiti elder. She was one of the 13 grandmothers, which was an indigenous council of 13 women who were really matriarchs in different shamanic lineages around the globe. And what does she have to say? What does she think about what's happening perhaps in this biotech field? She says, it's no longer okay for people to go into our forests, to take our medicines, patent them without our permission, and use them without our teachings. So it's not just about the medicine or the molecules. It's also about asking for permission and using it with the teachings, which we'll see is inseparable with what Nagoya has to say. If we look across the landscape of psychedelics, I would argue that Nagoya compliance should apply broadly to any compound that has any type of indigenous or historic use. All of these on the left have clear traditional use. They're all being extracted and patented, and essentially none of them have adherence to Nagoya or prior informed consent. I made a little icon of Journey Collab, who I'm happy to be working with. To my knowledge, they're the first company trying to do something about this and leading with this ethic with mescaline. So within the psychedelic community, there's been 2 more prominent ethical initiatives that have been advanced. So the first one was developed by Bob Jesse and a cohort of individuals, Council on Spiritual Practices, and the North Star Pledge. I invite you to look at these. They're beautiful, really admirable, kind of ideal ethical principles to abide by, and virtually 0 of the psychedelic biotech companies have adhered to this in terms of patenting, in terms of open science, in terms of givebacks. It's pretty much vacant in terms of any companies leading with any kind of adherence to these. And the problems with these is they're amazing, but they're not enforceable. And they also kind of don't address the ecological concerns or indigenous. So I think essential definition in this, which could be in the future actually a legal violation or term that would apply, is the accusation of biopiracy. So in defining biopiracy, it's the discovery of and misappropriation and commercialization of biological compounds, traditional knowledge, and processes relating to them that are known to the indigenous people by any person being in a dominant position and obtaining intellectual property rights upon the discovery without authorization, compensation, or commemoration to the source. And I would argue that this is kind of happening in spades right now. And this could be legal cases in the future for many companies that are engaging this way. So I'm not going to read all this slide, but the 3 main problems with biopiracy are that it's extracting of nature, it's extracting of people and traditional knowledge. And really, with the Nagoya Protocol and these UN decrees, the buck kind of stops here with Nagoya, I would say. And Nagoya was set up to address biopiracy. These are three kind of large examples of biopiracy. There was a man named Lauren Miller who attempted to patent ayahuasca in the 80s and was denied due to lack of novelty for the patent 13 years later. Took 13 years. So we're just now in the inception of what's happening with psychedelic biotech. So we could predict that some of this may be coming down the pipeline. India has established some of the most robust patent protection stipulations, as well as legal cases that have come up, and famous cases, just turmeric trying to be patented for wound healing. That was rejected, and India's rejected over 200 patents based on extracting traditional knowledge. And Africa has had a large share of companies that have tried to extract indigenous plants as well. These are some news articles that have shown companies like Germany and India are enforcing Nagoya Protocol. So this is being enforced. These are the 5 sort of need to know declarations. If I could kind of give you all homework to do, would be to look up these, 6 actually, UN declarations. The first one being UNDRIP, the Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People. We're going to talk about 2 through 4 just at a really kind of high level, or 2 through 5 actually. And then lastly, the UNESCO recommendation on open science. So the first one is the Convention on Biological Diversity. This is sort of the ground zero. This was initiated in 1992, and it's the only international instrument that legally pertains to this issue. And it was ratified by virtually every country on the planet, except guess who? The US and the Vatican. And there's 3 objectives. The first one is conservation. The second one is sustainable use. And the third one is the fair and equitable sharing of benefits. And this phrase, the fair and equitable sharing of benefits, is sort of the heart of Nagoya. And if this is working in a balanced way, there should be this sort of reciprocal giving or blessing type of flow between all of these nodes of the resources of sustainability and give back to sharing the benefits that are coming from using these molecules. So the Nagoya Protocol was developed out of the Convention on Biological Diversity. It was adopted in 2010 in Nagoya, Japan, and enforced in 2014. And it was designed to address that third point of the Convention on Biological Diversity, which is the fair and equitable sharing of benefits that arise out of the use of plants and resources. And what's beautiful in my mind about this is that it also covers traditional knowledge. So like we saw with Grandmother Bernadette, it's not acceptable to use the plants without their knowledge. It'd be like if we gave a laptop to a caveman and said, here you go, and there's no instruction. It's this foreign technology that really lacks any kind of rootedness or historicity of how to use it. And we'll see later, the Bwiti have been using Iboga for millennia, and they have quite a bit of technology and protocols and wisdom wrapped around it that are essential. And it was designed to protect against biopiracy, is really the heart of Nagoya. And you can download it. It's really easy to find if you Google. There's 3 basic pillars of Nagoya Protocol. Number 1, that countries that are seeking access need to request authorization before they start working with the plan or patenting it. The countries can impose conditions for what it means to have equitable benefit sharing for the country that it's being derived from. For example, profit sharing. And the parties of the Nagoya Protocol are the ones who enforce compliance with it. And it could be bumped up to the UN. The emphasis on traditional knowledge is essential because it's been handed down for generations. And the heart of this is saying that including traditional knowledge will strengthen the ability of the communities to benefit from their own innovations and their own practices. And what's tricky is that, for example, in Bwiti, it's forbidden to write books about Bwiti. It's an initiatic mystery school. So inherent in the fabric of it is it's private. You can't find a book written about Bwiti by Bwiti. It's always a French person or a Westerner. So we have to acknowledge the culture here. They're not creating IP portfolios and manuals. This is an oral cultural tradition. The FPIC is an extension of the Nagoya Protocol that is terms of engagement of what needs to happen before a company actually goes into this process. So in engaging with a country around this, the relationship, it has to be free, non-coercive. You have to do it prior, in advance of the project. The party themselves, so for example, the Bwiti have to be informed about the project and fully understand it, and they have to consent to it. This is a diagram you may not be able to see, but if you download it, you will be able to. And it's sort of a visual of how the flow of information is supposed to work. So you'd start with the genetic resources, say Iboga, coupled with the traditional knowledge, and you're working with the providers who may be indigenous practitioners. Then when a user or a biotech company wants to come into the scene, they have to use prior informed consent, and they have to establish mutually agreed terms with the providers and the parties in place. Then once the users, the biotech companies, start using it in the lab or clinical studies, whatever, they're going to be generating benefits like IP, investment, profits, and this has to go back to the source. It has to go back to the providers. It has to support traditional knowledge, and it has to support the genetic resources and the natural origins of where the plant species originate from. And this is how the benefits are meant to flow. And if it's flowing properly, it really could be a blessing, moving from people who are raising hundreds of millions of dollars, using it, and then bridging it back into these communities. And we really do owe everything to these communities who have stewarded these sacred plants for generations. The Access Benefit Sharing Clearinghouse is really, it's kind of the practical portal of where a company would go to initiate this process. And I kind of wanted to make this talk like a dummy's guide so that if someone's learning about this, they could know where to go. So this portal is to establish legal certainty about access, to identify how benefits can be shared, and also to enforce compliance. So you can go to this website, you can look up the country of question, say we're talking about mushrooms in Mexico, we're talking about Iboga in Gabon. You can, boom, go look up Gabon. You can see when they ratified the Nagoya Protocol and who is the contact. And it's actually Mr. Emmanuel here. I reached out to him. I haven't heard back from him, but I just reached out last week. I look forward to talking with him more. But any of these ibogaine companies want to do this, you talk to Emmanuel. This is where you go. So if we think about Iboga in the context of Gabonese history, Gabon has been historically perhaps one of the most colonized countries on the planet, arguably, with slave trade, forced evangelization by Christian Europeans since the 15th century. It was occupied by France and really didn't gain independence until 1960. And the capital of Gabon is called Libreville, which is named after the freeing of the slaves. And this was a really central port of slavery. So you have a lot of heavy colonization and slavery karma that has been imposed upon Gabon. And it's also one of the most rich biodiverse areas on the planet in tropical Africa. And it is in danger predominantly through the use of the logging industry, who are decimating the forests. So what's beautiful about Gabon is it was the first country ever on the planet to sign the Nagoya Protocol. The US, we are the last. We haven't even signed it yet. Maybe one of the only countries other than the Vatican. So in Gabonese history, Iboga has been used for millennia, and it was declared in 2000 by the president of Gabon to be a national treasure. So here in the US, it's a Schedule I drug. There in Gabon, it's their national treasure. And they signed a decree in 2019, just recently, that they've banned exportation of Iboga because there's a lot of poaching, illegal exportation. It's a monetary asset in a fairly impoverished country, so there's a lot of incentive for it to be exported. But they've banned that to protect their sacrament, to protect what they call the sacred wood, the holy wood. But now many companies are capitalizing on Iboga. You also don't know in all these companies where they're getting their ibogaine from. It's got to come from Iboga or from another plant, Voakanga. And my Bwiti teacher knows some individuals in the government and said there's companies that have made petitions to request like tons of Iboga without, they just want to do a clean kind of sale without any adherence to Nagoya. But Gabon's getting savvy to it, and they are abiding by Nagoya at this time. So Iboga has clearly been used for millennia. I said this. There's traditional knowledge linked to Iboga, which is critical. Things like ritual preparations, how to prepare the body, how to enhance visions. Iboga can be used for healing addiction, but that's not its highest function. Its highest function is a spiritual technology. And it's a spiritual technology because if you've ever done Iboga or talked to people who have done this, in some cases at the higher depth of it, it literally takes you into the spirit realm. And people may argue with that from a materialist perspective, but people are reliably seeing ancestors, traveling through dimensions, through the cosmos, to past lives. So this is a high-level spiritual technology, and the Bwiti are the knowledge keepers of how to use the technology. So some points to ponder is, to date, no biotech companies that I know of, I could be wrong, that are working with ibogaine have demonstrated reciprocity to Gabon or included Bwiti traditional knowledge in using the medicine. We could ask, under the Nagoya Protocol, which is an international legally enforceable declaration, how could benefit sharing be established between Gabon and these companies that are working with ibogaine? How could we bless Gabon and empower Bwiti to make full economic use of their beautiful, people say beautiful, beautiful heritage, and be stakeholders in the development of ibogaine? And what I would like to advance as an add-on point is that this is sort of a baseline metric within the UN of an international protocol, but what would it look like if we applied this broadly to the psychedelic biotech space? Because people could argue, oh, we're using synthetic forms of ibogaine, or we're using new chemical entities or new psychedelics. We don't need to abide by that. But I think we can do better, and that this bar of Nagoya sets us up to look at all of this as a reciprocal ecosystem, paying homage and reciprocity to our elders and the origins of where these things come from. So when we think about the psychedelic space, it's been stewarded by underground chemists, underground practitioners, academics, drug policy advocates, nonprofit groups, and these are perhaps like our indigenous elders when it comes to synthetic psychedelics, of where we could have this sort of blessing type of relationship versus an extractive relationship. And what we know from many of the larger players in the psychedelic biotech space so far, they've operated in egregiously extractive ways of extracting IP from practitioners and researchers. And I've been not victim, but I've been on the receiving end of that kind of paradigm and pattern. So what would it look like if we applied that kind of reciprocal model of Nagoya to the space? And there's obviously on the left here, I listed clear indigenous use with all these psychedelics: ibogaine, DMT, ayahuasca, 5-MeO, bufotenine, psilocybin, mescaline, salvia, LSA, LSD. There's a clear use, historical use. So these all could fall under the spectrum of Nagoya. Some of the newer ones, 2CB, MDMA, Shulgin compounds, designer psychedelics, they don't have this ancestral traditional use for millennia, but we could look at who are the parties that we could demonstrate reciprocity and blessing to. So my conclusions in recommending to biotech companies and for us as a community is, number one, that anyone working in this space should be investigating and identifying any and all cultural lineages, regions, or people that are associated with the history of the compound. They should, first and foremost, out the gate, in accordance with FPIC, be asking permission. This is like a basic principle. Ask permission before you steal grandma's cookies to the respective UN representatives from those countries, be it Gabon, Mexico, Brazil, etc. Then go through the clearinghouse, the Nagoya clearinghouse, and make an agreement with the party. And I would argue that number four, that companies should be structuring their corporate economic models to allocate support, reciprocity, and profit sharing with indigenous communities or groups, and not just some sort of really minor give back, like 1% of Starbucks profits goes to whatever. We're talking about really blessing these people. Like, for example, Journey Collab, I believe they're allocating like a third of their cap table for their profits to indigenous groups, which I think is an example of blessing. And this ethic should be front and center. And this is not just a nice feel good, do good type of principle. This is something that could lead to international legal prosecution in the future with Nagoya, with failure to abide by these UN principles because of the case of biopiracy. And I mentioned these other sort of points already, but synthetic psychedelics should operate with the same paradigm of obtaining permission and getting demonstrating reciprocity. These are two NGOs in Gabon that I think are worthwhile supporting, doing amazing work in conservation and preservation of ancestral knowledge with Bwiti. This is a beautiful offering advanced by Tracurna, where they aggregated 30 different NGOs, nonprofits that can demonstrate reciprocity broadly. And I think these could be groups that could be funded by any company working with any compounds in the psychedelic space. And this is a fun picture from Blessings of the Forest from Jan Gugnon, who is a director. He made these kind of fun corporate-looking Iboga hats and shirts, which I think kind of highlight the juxtaposition of the corporate process of what's happening in extracting some of these. So thank you. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Joseph. That was extremely important information, and I appreciate you sharing that. I remember when we went to the conference in Mexico about ibogaine and iboga, just you had so much conversation about this type of thing. And it's extremely important. It's been kind of a running theme throughout this conference. Okay, sorry, I'm having to monitor certain things here, but it just kind of highlights what I've talked about at the beginning, like the three poisons. One of it, greed, hatred, and ignorance. This is kind of encapsulating the whole greed element, and just kind of the shadow side of capitalism. I don't want to knock capitalism because it has positive aspects and everything, but the greed aspect and the serving of self and the serving of small numbers of people at the expense of others, instead of serving a larger community, is a huge problem, and it's something we need to address now. And so, and it underlines a lot of different principles, like the issue of fairness, the issue of power and respect. And I think it's reprehensible what our countries and other countries have done to other countries in terms of the relationship to these sacred medicines. It's just I don't know, it's terrible. Let me see how much time we have, and I appreciate your telling this in such a short amount of time, because it's a very. I want to have you, maybe you can do something separate, a different Lance event, to talk about this further, because this is
sure, it's really important.
Yeah. So let me go ahead and okay, it looks like our next speaker is ready, but wow, I mean, I wish we had more time.
Oh, good, thank you.
But I'm glad. So you said your slides are available to everyone, and
yeah, if you just Google my name, they're on my personal website during underneath lectures. People can download it.
Okay. Thank you so much, Joseph, and I'm looking forward to seeing you back on the 5MEO panel, which is coming up after the next talk. And thank you, brother. Appreciate all your work, and God bless.
Blessings.
All right.